To begin with, I would like to thank all of those who have helped to draft this bill. I'd specifically like to highlight the contributions of all the cross-sectoral stakeholders who took part in a roundtable I hosted last year. I'd also like to single out Jen Mills at the Bill Office, who was instrumental in shaping this bill into a deliverable form, alongside Pete Kennedy for his work on the legal grounding. I must also thank Dr Paul Ongeron-Fady at the Centre for Long-Term Resilience, who conceived of this bill and has been advocating it for since he first joined my office in 2021 and continues to support it, and also a succession of British Society for Antimicrobial Chemotherapy interns who have helped me along to this point. It's a great pleasure to see so many noble lords here today. Thank you all. I start by explaining the motivation and rationale behind bringing forward this bill. It aims to curtail the general sale and subsequent spread onto human bodies and into the environment of consumer products intended for human use, which contain biocides. Noble lords will hear me repeat this phrase, consumer products intended for human use, several times today. And it is an important phrase in conveying the narrow scope of the targeted and well-evidenced policy interventions contained in this bill. Now, for the purposes of this bill, biocides are chemicals which have an antimicrobial effect, i.e. they kill bacteria and other microorganisms. It will probably strike any members of the public tuning into this debate that it's strange to want to spare bacteria. After all, hasn't the public been told for many years that killing 99.9% of bacteria is a desirable feature of many products? You will probably see an advert today saying just that. But this could not be more wrong, and it is high time we reclaim the narrative around bacteria on our bodies, and in our environments. Now, I want to be very clear about one thing. This bill does not, in any way, shape or form, restrict the ability of qualified medical professionals from providing medicines to patients in need. It also in no way impacts on veterinary treatment or products for animals. The bill concerns consumer products intended for human use, and only consumer products intended for human use. There are very valid use cases for biocide-containing products, such as mouthwashes with chlorhexidine, sold by a qualified pharmacist to patients suffering from, say, mouth ulcers. Octinidine containing soaps prescribed by dermatologists to patients suffering from a range of skin conditions. Silver impregnated dressings for wound care, and more. I reiterate again, the passage of this bill into law would have no effect whatsoever on the use of these products in medicine. My aim is to protect the ongoing functioning of these products in medicine by curtailing their commercial availability and overuse. Now, we are behind the times when it comes to regulating biocides in consumer products intended for human use. In 2016, almost a decade ago, the United States Food and Drug Administration banned 19 biocides from hand soaps and hand washes. Why? Very simply, in the words of one FDA official, because, quote, there is no data demonstrating that these drugs provide additional protection from diseases and infections, close quote. This official went on to say, some data suggests that antibacterial ingredients may do more harm than good in the long term, close quote. This is a key point and one that I will return to. Now, the FDA has continued its campaign to educate Americans on the non-superiority of biocide-containing consumer products. As recently as last month, it published a press release entitled, "Skip the Antibacterial Soap, Use Plain Soap and Water." Why did it do this? Because a decade later, despite all of the follow-up studies commissioned by the industry, the fact remains, as the FDA states in that release, quote, there isn't sufficient evidence to show that over-the-counter antibacterial soaps are better at preventing illness than washing with plain soap and water, close quote. Now, the FDA chose to limit the scope of its advice to soaps. I have not. Antibacterial hand sanitisers, mouthwashes and oral products are also in the scope of this bill. As an article published today in the Daily Mirror in coincidence with this reading, biocides are found in many consumer products intended for human use, and members of the public are often unwittingly purchasing and using these products with potentially negative effects. It is widely recognised there is no advantage in these biocides being present in soaps, but noble lords may wonder if that's the full extent of my grievance. It is not. I've worked closely with the Women's Environmental Network, often known as WEN, who have run a continuing brilliant environmental campaign. As a politician, feminism is one of my first politics, and I was horrified when WEN highlighted to me that period products are being laced with silver, sold to women on the basis that periods make them smell bad. This is an example of the pernicious kind of advertising that underpins the sale of many biocide-containing products intended for human use. Consumers are shamed, made to feel dirty by having normal, natural microbiomes or carrying out normal bodily functions like sweating or menstruating. Swedish government research has shown that up to 90% of the silver in treated articles for reusable menstrual products flows out into waterways after only 10 washes. This is a pointless and dangerous use of biocides, one that is spreading fast also into other clothing products, often marketed as high-tech, desirable and expensive, a trend that urgently needs to be addressed. Now, the use of biocides leads to a rise in resistance to biocides. This is a form of antimicrobial resistance, or AMR. Additional commercial use undermining the medical use of the same biocides is the threat of cross-resistance. This is when exposure to one antimicrobial, like the biocide in mouthwash, leads to resistance to a different antimicrobial, like the antibiotic of last resort for a critically ill patient. There's a detailed case study of this in the briefing paper for this bill that I prepared with Dr. Fady and Dr. Katie Stokes that's available on the BSAC website if you'd like more information. In 2022, I was the first to raise the issue of cross-resistance in this place in over a quarter of a century, but such a pernicious issue has only been discussed 9 times across both chambers since its first mention in 1973, shows that we are not taking cross-resistance seriously. But health authorities in this country are aware of the risk, with scientists at the UKHSA describing biocide resistance as, quote, a new scourge of the infectious disease world, quote, because of the problem of cross-resistance. Now, thanks in large part to the determined, concentrated work of Dame Sally Davies, many members of your Lordship's House will have at least heard of antimicrobial resistance. Perhaps you read the large article in The Observer this month. But the real urgency and scale of this problem has not yet really struck in government, in the corridors or departments of the civil service, or among the general public. Every 11 seconds, someone falls ill with a resistant infection. Every 3 minutes in the world, someone dies from AMR. By the time we finish this bill's second reading, probably something like 90 minutes, there will have been 30 deaths from AMR globally. Nesta, the British charity, said in 2019 that that was the first year where we'll all know someone with a drug-resistant infection. Whether this is an untreatable recurrent urinary tract infection, a recalcitrant diabetic foot ulcer, or simply a chest infection that doesn't respond to the first round of antibiotics, it's almost certain that Nesta's analysis was correct. But beyond undermining our antibiotics, the widespread availability of biocide-containing tumour products for human use poses another threat: microbiotoxicity. This is a fancy way of saying damage to the human microbiome, the community of microorganisms living on and in us. We are increasingly starting to understand the importance of these microorganisms in health and disease. In the Mental Health Bill, I spoke about the gut-brain axis and our slowly dawning understanding of the importance of the microbiome in mental illness. Impact on other bodily systems is also becoming clearer. Research has shown, for example, that wiping out the oral microbiome with chlorhexidine mouthwashes risks increasing blood pressure. This then has consequences on the risk of heart disease. Now, I recently published a letter to the editor alongside brilliant scientists and clinicians in the Journal of Infection calling for the recognition of the human microbiome as an organ system. I'd be happy to circulate this to any learned noble lords interested. Finally, I should address the environmental angle. The unimpeded flow of biocides into our waterways is undoubtedly a bad thing. As was confirmed to me this week at a meeting of the Farmer Pollution Hub, a new and exciting initiative engaging with this crucial issue, we have yet to be able to understand, to model exactly how all the various chemicals mixing together in our waterways, in our water, are affecting our environment. This is known as the cocktail effect and entails complex dynamics and interrelationships that are extremely difficult to quantify. A fundamental truth, however, is that the fewer chemicals and biocides there are in our waterways, I'd also add microplastics, the less they can interact and exert their effects on our aquatic species, on our entire ecosystems, and of course, ultimately, our bodies. If for no other reason than the precautionary principle to which the previous government committed us through the Environment Act, I hope noble lords can see the sense in this bill trying to curtail the amount of biocides ending up in our environment. I will postpone to another day comments on the soil microbiomes that are also crucial to our food security. Now, I've not run through the clauses and mechanisms of this bill because the excellent library briefing does that very clearly, and I wanted to take some time to set out what are still not widely familiar scientific principles. But I want to thank particularly the noble and learned Lord Thomas O'Keefe for taking part in this debate at my request. I apologise for possibly messing up the Noble Lords Friday, because this bill seeks to take what I believe is a novel approach to product regulation, and I will particularly value the noble and learned Lords' thoughts on the approach taken, although it is based on the model from several other bills. For we have what is colourfully known as a whack-a-mole problem when it comes particularly to chemicals regulation. A novel chemical is produced, tested by the manufacturer in the ways that it chooses, then put onto the market. As problems emerge, campaigners speak out, companies resist, and usually decades later, that single chemical is eventually banned. Then a new chemical, possibly similar, often worse in its impacts, is devised, and we go back through the same cycle. We've seen this with PFAS, the forever chemicals that are of such public concern. This bill seeks to set us on a new path, to modestly and practically start to tackle the exceeding of the planetary boundaries for novel entities that has turned our rivers, seas and environments into such a dangerous cocktail of substances. I also must note to the noble Lord the Minister that we are of course debating this bill while the Product Regulation and Metrology Bill is going through your Lordship's House, so there is an opportunity for the government to pick this up, holus bolus, and incorporate it into the bill. I live in hope. Now, finally, I often say that it's the first duty of the state to ensure the health of its citizens. My vision of the Green Party is that we are a party of public health, of one health. Though this bill embodies many of the principles we in the Green Party uphold, it is absolutely not a partisan bill. It is in everyone's best interest to prevent harm to human health and to the health of our environment. My Lords, I beg to move.
Hear, hear. The question is that this... Pleasure. The question is that this bill be now read a second time.
With apologies, it's a pleasure to rise in support of this bill and to have the opportunity not merely to applaud the intentions in drafting of the bill, but to also to pay tribute to its sponsor, the noble Lady Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle. When reading this bill, I was reminded of an interview with Bill Franklin, the pioneering immunologist who was recalling his time in 1936 studying under Sir Alexander Fleming at Imperial College. Fleming, who was born and educated both at primary and secondary level in my constituency in Ayrshire in the west of Scotland, in a lecture was recounting his discovery of penicillin. He ended it with a warning that, and I quote, "Penicillin will change the face of medicine, but doctors will overuse it. Bacteria have to survive. They are very, very clever, and they will become resistant to it." If the father of antibiotic medicine was making this case at that distance, how much more urgent is it that we act today and as fast as possible? We are, as the noble lady Baroness Bennett made clear in her excellent opening speech, in a perilous situation. Antibiotics are one of the most extraordinary and transformative products of human ingenuity, but their efficacy is being undermined not merely by the extraordinarily adaptive qualities of bacteria, but by the failure of humans effectively to regulate their own behaviour. Despite its less than poetic title, this bill is about human behaviour where collective and individual rights find themselves in conflict. Peer-reviewed scientific literature has shown us repeatedly that the use of an antibacterial soap containing biocides offers no advantage whatsoever to the average consumer compared with normal soap. But marketing has convinced consumers that it's in some way preferable. That's why Clause 6 of this bill is important. It aims purely to align perception with reality and to ensure implicit but misleading claims that a consumer product contains biocides and is more effective than one without should be an offence, unless the Biocidal Consumer Product Advisory Board created under Clause 3 deems that claim true and verifiable. It cannot be right that commercial imperatives that mandate the inclusion of unnecessary biocides in commercial products are allowed to trump the interest of everyone on the planet to ensure that antimicrobial resistance is controlled. I do not set myself up as a scientific expert of any sort, but it's precisely because I'm not a scientist that I believe we should take precautionary measures in the face of uncertainty, even from scientists whose insight into the impact of biocide dwarfs my own. Crucially, once antimicrobial resistance is established, it is irreversible. That fact only reinforces my belief that the precautionary principle that animates this bill should be adhered to. Even the US, which often takes a more buccaneering approach to questions of capitalism than we do in the United Kingdom, has begun banning the use of biocides in washes and soaps, with, as we've heard, the FDA having issued guidance not to buy antimicrobial soaps. My Lords, in my contribution to the debate on the private member's bill that preceded this, I was forced to have recourse to humility, conceding that other noble lords from all sides of the House had more expertise and direct experience of the matter in question than I did, and I may be breaking a personal record in conceding that twice in a row. So I look forward to listening to the remainder of the debate and better informed. I started this short contribution by reference to Alexander Fleming. I'm going to make a further one. In 2008, on the 80th anniversary of the discovery of penicillin, I invited Professor Hugh Pennington, the emeritus professor of bacteriology at the University of Aberdeen, and then the leading bacteriologist in the country, to come and speak to school children in my constituency. He told them this. He said, life on this planet is a competition between the bugs and us, humans. The bugs have been around for 3.5 billion years. We've only been around for 300 years. We're likely to lose if we're not careful. In short, my Lords, because this bill is on the side of Homo sapiens, I support the aims of it, and whether in this form or in the form of future government bills, I very much look forward to seeing them given legislative expression as soon as possible.
So I congratulate the noble Baroness Lady Bennett for her success in the ballot for private members' bills and bringing forward this bill this session. Her bill gives the House the opportunity to consider the implications of the use of biocides in consumer products and reflect on the crucial importance of controlling and containing antimicrobial resistance, something to which the noble Lord Brown has just cogently referred. My noble friend Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton, when Prime Minister, was determined to tackle the threat to human health posed by AMR. Way back in 2014, he stated that, and I quote, resistance to antibiotics is now a very real and worrying threat, as bacteria mutate to become immune to their effects. If we fail to act, we are looking at an almost unthinkable scenario where antibiotics no longer work and we are cast back into the dark ages of medicine, where treatable infections and injuries will kill once again. I'm therefore pleased that the Labour government supports the Conservative government's 20-year vision for tackling AMR, which aims to control and contain it by 2040. I hope that the government will work closely at an international level on these matters to continue to press forward with a coherent global response. That should mean not only working with nations and the World Health Organization, but, my lords, also with business and the world of science. The noble lady proposes to constrain further in her bill the use of biocides in some consumer products. She is justifiably concerned about the impact on AMR that could result from biocide resistance. When legislation is brought forward to restrict the manufacture and sale of goods on the basis of perceived public health safety, it is right that one should examine whether there are already measures in place which can protect the public. I therefore note that biocidal active substances and biocidal products are already regulated by the Health and Safety Executive under the GB Biocidal Products Regulation. And of course, my lords, many consumer products are regulated by the General Product Safety Regulations 2005. DEFRA, the Environment Agency, and the UK Health Security Agency all have locus in this matter. My lords, it's always difficult to draft legislation which seeks to protect public health by banning something without also having a negative impact on innovation and imposing the requirement on business to comply with new complex regulatory processes. Sometimes it's right to do so, but the devil is always in the detail. I note that Clause 3 creates yet another quango, the Biocidal Consumer Products Advisory Board. I think we need more information about that on the face of the bill. And, my lords, I do note that the government, in just over 5 months, has already established a raft of advisory boards, quangos galore. I really had hoped not to see more. It would be helpful at committee to explore some of the interesting but vague terms in the bill. I think of this wording in Clause 2, real-world conditions. I'd love to find out how those can be legally defined. My lords, I do look forward to the opportunity at committee stage to have time to give more and I think better consideration to what can be an important bill.
My lords, it's a pleasure to follow the noble lady and to hear her concerns over too many advisory bodies and quangos, and there's always a difficulty knowing what they do and how they report. But I do congratulate the noble lady Baroness Bennett on bringing this forward. If I might add another quote from Sir Alexander Fleming, when he received the Nobel Prize for discovering penicillin, which he did at the medical school that I went to, which was St Mary's, he said, "It is not difficult to make microbes resistant to penicillin in the laboratory by exposing them to concentrations not sufficient to kill them." I think that lesson might apply much more widely, because sadly it applies to our armamentarium of antibiotics, and we now face a world where multiple resistance is becoming the norm. Professor McClellan's recent fascinating lecture at the Royal Society described the urgent need to develop vaccines against some of the major bacterial killers. In 2022, 7.7 million deaths were attributable to bacterial infections worldwide, of which 80% were linked to antimicrobial resistance. With rising antibiotic use, resistance is increasing, but biocides are not the solution. Biocides are a diverse group of poisonous substances, including preservatives, insecticides, disinfectants, and pesticides, used for the control of organisms that are harmful to human or animal health, or that cause damage to natural or manufactured products. The problem is that these chemicals are themselves harmful, both directly and by producing the cross-resistance and co-resistance to antimicrobials already referred to. When bacteria develop cross-resistance, their general defence mechanism is against multiple threats, both the biocides in consumer products and the antibiotics we use to fight infection. Co-resistance, meanwhile, takes place when resistant genes are genetically linked. So there are two mechanisms at least, and exposure to common biocides can inadvertently promote antibiotic resistance. These manufactured chemicals are actually subject to little legal constraint, as already outlined, and almost no post-marketing surveillance. Fewer than 20% overall have been tested for toxicity, yet many cross the placenta, and chemical exposure seems even more harmful to children than to adults. Biocides act by damaging the cell wall of an organism, but that is not discriminatory. They also damage the cell wall of our own body's living cells that they come into contact with. That's often our skin and the delicate cells of our respiratory tract. If the skin's irritated, a contact dermatitis develops, an eczema-like response, which is itchy, sore, and the skin cracks, breaking the natural barrier function of the skin, allowing bacteria to enter and infect underlying tissues. An allergic response is separate and can also develop, as in allergic dermatitis and in asthma, which can be life-threatening. We all have protective commensal bacteria on our skin, in our gut and mucous membranes, but when they're damaged by biocides, harm results. Many cosmetics and some period products are being marketed as biocidal, but without the appropriate risk assessment evidence. This bill would establish a biocidal consumer products advisory board, which I personally would welcome, to review scientific and social evidence on the use of biocides in consumer products, with a particular focus on microbiotoxicity. With rising incidence of childhood cancers, neurodevelopmental disorders, autism, allergies and childhood obesities, it's becoming negligent, quite apart from the rising infection rate, to ignore the possible role of manufactured chemicals in our daily lives, hence the importance of the precautionary approach outlined here in this bill.
My Lords, may I begin by thanking the noble Baroness Bennet of Manor Castle for introducing the bill and the way in which she comprehensively introduced it, and to say that I think this is a bill that brings forward issues that the House and the Government should take seriously. The world faces any number of threats to human health, but one of the more long-term threats we face continues to be antimicrobial resistance, AMR, which is the risk that in future bacteria will be resistant to antibiotics. I'd like to thank the Royal Society of Biology for the briefing that's provided for this debate. I should add that I am myself a fellow, and emphasise that the briefing does not represent the formal position of the RSB, but is what you might call a rapid reaction summary based on relevant external reports from RSB member organisations and external bodies. Nevertheless, it's a very helpful briefing to receive. Now, my Lords, we know a lot more than we used to do about what is called the human microbiome, and yet perhaps people don't fully understand yet how complex that is and how vital it is to our health. The microbiome is the collection of microbes in our intestines that affect our digestion, immune system, brain health and more. Now, the Royal Society of Biology points out that, quote, perspectives are complex on the use of biocides. Why is that? Because the use presents both opportunities and risks. The use case for biocides includes contribution to the protection of public health through infection control by reducing the spread of harmful pathogens, for example, in health facilities and food production. But among the potential risks are the use of biocides can contribute to the development of AMR and hence significant global public health risks. Whatever one's view on this bill, the fact remains that biocides are found in consumer products intended for human use, and these products range from soaps to mouthwashes to clothes and to period products. I might add in passing that some biocide products do not list the ingredients on the packet, such as products containing nanosilver, about which there is growing concern, especially in relation to feminine hygiene products. Now, why does any of this matter? Well, my Lords, it matters because there is evidence to suggest that the uncontrolled use of biocides may be increasing AMR. I notice that in the scientific literature there's a great emphasis on the need for a deeper understanding of the interaction and impact of pesticides and insecticides and biocides on the microbial communities. We don't want to find that the increased use of biocides accidentally damages the highly complex world of microorganisms. On this basis, I think there is a case that the complexity of biocide risks calls for a precautionary approach. I just want to mention one other aspect of the broader debate about AMR. I'm a member of your Lordship's Science and Technology Committee, and on Tuesday this week we had a really interesting presentation about bacteriophages, which are viruses which can control and kill bacteria, including some of the most deadly known to humankind, such as sepsis. Now, it may be stretching the boundaries of today's debate to refer to phages, but I'd be interested in anything the noble lady says in her winding-up remarks about the relevance of this to the broader impact and objectives of her bill. So, to return to the bill itself, I'd just like to pass on to the House the advice of the Royal Society of Biology that there are challenges to ensuring the responsible use of biocides, especially in terms of regulation, adoption and education, which can limit their effectiveness. And on this basis, I hope my noble friend the Minister, even if he's not in a position formally to convey government support for this particular bill at this particular moment, will nevertheless take back to the relevant department some of the questions that arise. I'll briefly mention 4. 1. Will the government be prepared to take a detailed look at the use of biocides in consumer products? 2. Will the government consider establishing its own biocidal consumer products advisory board or something similar to keep under review the scientific evidence? 3rd, will the government at least consent to the proposition that if there are grounds to believe that a biocidal computer product is deemed to present a danger, then steps can be taken to ban its sale or use? And finally, will the government undertake to report to Parliament regularly on the impact of biocides in consumer products? My Lords, these seem to me to be perfectly sensible questions to ask, and whether or not this particular bill makes progress, I'd like to commend Baroness Bannercastle for bringing it to the attention of the House.
I also thank Baroness Bannercastle for the introduction of this bill, and thank those who preceding me in enhancing a little my scientific education. I am not going to comment on the science of the bill, but comment on what is an important general development, which is making certain the law keeps pace with our greater knowledge of science and adapt itself. And I therefore wanted to speak about Clause 2, not so much about its detailed wording, because I see the point that Baroness Ainlay made about particular words, but that's not the purpose of the second reading debate. I think why it is important is that subclauses B and C raise issues that we have to grapple with. Now, our criminal law was developed at a time over the centuries when punishments were particularly harsh, trials fast, and steps were gradually taken to try and ameliorate that harshness and make the conviction of someone for a criminal offence fairer and more just. And it became an important part of our criminal law, where the resources of the state were vast, that it was for the state to establish the elements of the offence and prove them beyond reasonable doubt or making sure. Parliament has for some time taken a slightly different approach, which I wanted to mention because it's akin to this. The law generally proceeds by building on what has gone in the past. It has for some time, therefore, been the policy of Parliament, accepted by the courts, to transfer certain matters where they lie particularly within the knowledge of the defendant before the court, to the defendant raising and establishing evidence of that issue. In most cases, because of the provisions of Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights, it has left to the state and the prosecution the burden of disproving the defence and showing that the offence is established, the burden on the defence being merely evidential. However, there are certain circumstances where the legal burden rests upon the defendant to establish a particular defence. Now, I say this provision is akin to that, and it's on that we should build. It seems to me this provision has at least 4 particularly important advantages. First of all, it places the responsibility at the outset firmly upon the manufacturer, and that is critical. Secondly, it ought to ensure that the manufacturer keeps what he is doing under review to ensure it's safe. Thirdly, I do think there is far too much regulation, and industry should think, isn't this sort of provision of self-responsibility better placed on the manufacturer? It may be harsh, the consequences down the line may be severe, but is not this a better way forward? And thirdly, it is realistic to realise that the state is not as equipped, certainly in the area of criminal justice, with the resources it once had. I therefore welcome this type of provision. I hope we shall see more provisions of this kind, because we constantly need to rethink and evaluate the regulatory burden that is placed, but actually what the criminal law can do to reduce that burden.
My Lords, from cosmetics and personal care items to treated clothing, biocides are increasingly found in products that we all use regularly, and I'm grateful to the Noble Lady Baroness Bennett for tabling this bill to enable us to consider this in more detail. Whilst biocides have their place in specific essential applications, their widespread and often unnecessary inclusion in everyday products does pose a significant threat to public health, contributing to the growing global crisis of antimicrobial resistance. And we've heard today about the current impact on resistant diseases, and the World Health Organization has identified AMR as one of the most urgent health crises of our time. And unless we take action, AMR could lead to an estimated 10 million deaths annually by 2050. Biocides and consumer goods, especially those that are not strictly necessary, do contribute to this alarming trend. And many products containing biocides do not really deliver any real health benefit and may in fact do more harm than good, undermining their effectiveness in driving antimicrobial resistance. Citing just one example as the concern around the use of silver, as we heard today, as an antimicrobial agent in period pants, where high levels could have health and environmental implications. And in addition to the problems highlighted by the Noble Lady Baroness Bennett in her introduction, the US Food and Drug Administration found that nanosilver can kill lactobacillus, which is the healthy bacteria in the vagina that helps fight off infection, and that can put women more at risk of harmful bacteria, potentially leading to an increased risk in bacterial infections and pregnancy complications. In the UK, there are currently no legal limits on how much silver can be added to period pants, and manufacturers do not have to declare the presence of silver on their packaging or website. We are seeing other countries take measures to ban some biocides from consumer products, and it's right that we're looking at our regulatory system carefully to ensure that it is fit for purpose. Of course, we must protect against regulation that would stifle innovation or that would limit products that genuinely benefit consumer health, and there certainly are legitimate uses for biocides, as we've heard. But I'm reassured that the bill provides some specific exemptions for proven medical products. Clause 3 of the bill would establish a biocidal consumer products advisory board to advise ministers on biocides. I share my noble friend Baroness Annalie's aversion to quangos, but I'm also a great believer in expert advice, particularly on complex scientific matters such as this. So I'm interested to hear from the noble Lord the Minister his thoughts on this. Does he agree that this expert advice would be beneficial to ministers when they're making decisions here? Clause 6 looks to address the issues around the marketing of false or unproved claims, and consumers must have transparency from manufacturers. And I agree with the Noble Lord Thomas that the responsibility for this should be considered to be put at the manufacturer's door. We regularly see messages about the importance of antibacterial or antimicrobial properties in consumer products, and we have the right to know what ingredients are in the products that we buy and if they genuinely offer significant health benefits. And we, of course, also should have the option to choose products that are free from unnecessary chemicals. And whilst there is existing consumer protection against misleading and deceptive commercial practices, I can certainly see the case for more specific guidance here. As my noble friend Baroness Annaley set out, there are existing protections for consumers, and we must be very careful not to over-regulate, not to duplicate and not to complicate the existing regulations. But we must also move towards responsible biocide use, ensuring that biocides are used only when they are truly necessary and excluding them from products that do not require antimicrobial action. This bill gives us the opportunity to consider our current framework and consider if we should be strengthening regulations around the use of biocides in consumer goods to ensure that the products marketed for daily use are safe and effective but do not contribute to AMR. And I look forward to the Noble Lord the Minister's response.
It's a long time since the only good microbe was considered to be a dead microbe. But even as I sat here in my office in Parliament, I noticed that we've been issued with an antimicrobial spray that claims it kills 99.9% of bacteria. And I'll come back to that spray in a bit. Our understanding of the microbial world has changed enormously in recent decades, and it's bound to continue to do so. Many people are now aware of the complexities and the importance of our gut microbiome. Far fewer know about our skin microbiome or the vaginal microbiome, and yet researchers are uncovering their importance as well. As the Noble Lady Baroness Sugg just mentioned, the research evidence that douching and other practices that affect the vaginal microbiome can increase the risks of infections and potentially affect fertility are coming to light. Our microbiomes are delicate systems intricately linked with our health. The idea then that any product like wipes and sprays, clothes, or worst of all, sanitary products containing chemicals explicitly to kill microbes should be marketed to consumers at all, let alone without clear labelling of what they contain and what those substances are doing, seems extraordinary to me. In fact, it seemed so extraordinary that I went to look at the Health and Safety Executive's guidance on biocidal products authorisation. And I took that spray from my parliamentary office and I looked at the ingredients, which it has a proud union flag on it and comes from a British manufacturer and lists the active ingredient. And I checked it against the HSE spreadsheet of biocidal chemicals. It was categorised as not approved for any use in the UK. This was literally the first product I checked, and once I started looking, I found this was far from an isolated case. Many similar antimicrobial sprays and wipes for sale on our high street seem to contain substances on that not approved list. Maybe this is a problem of enforcement, but as a confused consumer, I continued to investigate. So next I looked at treated articles like the odour-reducing socks, and the first pair I found advertised claimed to contain real silver fibres. I checked, and again, silver is labelled as not authorised on the HSE's biocidal regulations spreadsheet, and apparently cannot be used to treat products. So I asked whether I might be misunderstanding the regulations, and it seems not entirely clear whether treated articles come under HSE biocides regulation or whether they come under the General Product Safety Regulation. But I would have thought that if the HSE do not authorise use of the active chemicals, then they should not be used in any consumer products. Perhaps this is, again, just a failure of enforcement, but maybe it's also a lack of clarity in existing regulations. Looking at that long spreadsheet list, some silver compounds are still under review by HSE, so perhaps this is what the socks contained. This led me to find out what effects are considered when a substance is reviewed under these regulations. There's a lot of paperwork, but I can't see anything that shows that they consider the effects on the microbiome or the consequences of those effects, presumably because the microbiome hasn't been a recognised part of our biology for long enough for it to make it into legislation. And of course, the HSE are not responsible for assessing environmental effects. So overall, this seems to indicate that the current regulations are inconsistent, out of date, and possibly poorly enforced. So my impression as a consumer is that this is an area that needs looking into. Products appear to be on sale in Britain which raise concerns about their effects on individuals and the environment, and there are likely effects that seem not even to be being assessed on our microbiomes and on the environment. So I would ask the Minister to consider this whole matter of consumer antimicrobial products and what can be done to ensure that they're well regulated. And meanwhile, I'm certainly not going to be using that spray in my office.
It's a pleasure to follow Baroness Freeman of Steventon. Her experience in explaining science was much in evidence in her contribution today. And I also want to congratulate and thank Lady Bennett of Manor Castle in putting forward this bill and for securing today's second reading. She remains unafraid to raise issues that many would prefer we don't like speaking about, even if there are threats to our own safety and well-being. And Lady Sugg reminded us that antimicrobial resistance is growing and a danger to us all. Other noble lords have already covered the purpose of this bill. As Viscount Stansgate noted, it's to limit the wide use of biocides containing products, including soaps, mouthwashes and clothes. Why is this necessary? Well, as other noble lords have already said in this debate, clinical specialists are saying loud and clear that these consumer products pose a threat to public health. This isn't melodramatic. Over the last few years, we've had a number of questions and debates in your Lordship's House on the risk of AMR, and we know that the NHS is very concerned about this, recommending GPs think very carefully before prescribing antibiotics because of the risk of antimicrobial resistance. This bill is not addressing the medicinal uses of antibiotics. It proposes to curtail the use of antimicrobial products that we have in our homes, and we are bombarded with marketing and advertising for them every single day. As the briefing from the Centre for Long-Term Resilience says, using an antibacterial soap provides no advantage to the average consumer, and use by the general public, who have no special medical need for them, can undermine the effectiveness of antibiotics when they are needed. Lady Freeman's example just now of checking antimicrobial products using unapproved biocides was very, very helpful. And I do hope the Minister will ensure that that's looked at. And I am reminded that during the Product Regulation and Metrology Bill, and indeed during an SI 2 years ago now, I've raised the issue about what's happened after Brexit and the UK Health and Safety Executive's delays in getting the chemical database for products ready. And I wonder if this particular issue is also being looked at in relationship to the UK's new database. Lady Annalay spoke of the importance of the UK working internationally on this matter. The World Health Organization has been warning of inappropriate overuse of biocides for over a decade. Because if we don't reduce our use of unnecessary antimicrobial products, we risk resistant bacterium causing severe disease which cannot be treated. Yesterday, it was reported that the Klebsiella pneumoniae, a dangerous bacterium responsible for pneumonia, has been discovered in Ukraine. Experts there are particularly alarmed because the bacterium is resistant to drugs. Scientists believe it poses a significant threat to public health. Lady Finlay, with her medical expertise, spoke of research, and our doctors and scientists are warning us that the makers of consumer products are not listening, and they are the first who should listen. Those living with immunosuppression understand all too well the risks. Those with my condition who take regular immune-suppressing medication have a real concern about bacteria resistance to drugs. And I have to say, my lords, that tends to focus the mind. And I'm glad Lord Brown referred to Bill Frankland. I was treated by Bill Frankland over 50 years ago. He was an absolutely excellent immunologist, and very unusually, he recognised my first autoimmune disease long before any of the other medics did, and I'm eternally grateful to him for that. Lady Bennett's description of the use of silver in reusable menstrual products is very worrying. There is no general information available for girls and women on this issue. Lady Sugg told us other countries are already beginning to take action on some of these biocides. So should the UK. Lady Finlay talked about the medical problems already faced by the general public as biocides enter our bodies, and the long-term invisible health issues that we and future generations face. As a society, we appear to be walking blindfold into a new world of invisible and long-term damage to our bodies. Lord Thomas of Clongeath reminded us that we need to remember the consequences of any legislation on the law and the whole role of Parliament. And his view is that this bill is about clear where responsibility lies, helpfully with the manufacturers. So Lady Bennett's bill is, I think, the first such attempt to limit the use of these antimicrobial products. And I think she is starting an important debate that needs to be heard, especially by the companies manufacturing these products and advertising them. So can I ask the Minister if he will, at the very least, have a round table to get the manufacturers together with the Health and Safety Executive to cover the issues raised by Lady Bennett and also by Lady Freeman. But also, we need a wider public campaign, because all of us need to understand that far from being helpful products, they could make the UK a less safe place.
My Lords, please let me begin by thanking the noble Baroness Lady Bennet of Manor Castle for bringing her private member's bill to your Lordship's house. Consumer product regulation is a key topic in the world we currently live in, and we share her passion for protecting the environment from unnecessary harm. The noble Baroness has set out in clear and concise detail why she feels this bill is necessary. His Majesty's official opposition does not wish in any way to detract from the noble Baroness's good intentions, but it is only fair and reasonable that I am also clear on our behalf that we are unable to support this bill. As currently drafted, this bill has an extremely broad application. Whilst the offence of selling cosmetic and personal care products containing biocides is well defined, clauses 3 and 4 grant very wide powers of consumer products over consumer products to the Secretary of State and the proposed Biocidal Consumer Products Advisory Board. It appears that the noble Baroness Lady Bennet's concerns about the use of biocides understandably inform this version of drafting, but we do feel the broad and wide definition of these powers could lead to unintended overreach. We are also concerned that the bill takes a too exacting approach to regulation, and there are two strands to our concerns. Firstly, the bill sets the fine level for the sale of a cosmetic product containing biocides and the marketing of these products at level 5. By our understanding, that could result in an unlimited fine. It is conceivable that some reputable and legitimate firms may be discouraged from entering the cosmetic and personal care market with a technically unlimited level of liability. We would welcome the opportunity to hear from both the noble Lord the Minister, that is, if the government is supportive of this bill, and the noble Baroness Lady Bennet in her closing speech, as to what risk assessment impacts have been conducted on the impact to SME businesses. These firms are the lifeblood of the UK economy, and we really wish them to succeed both for job creation and tax receipts for the Exchequer, but realistically, they will not have the same capacity as larger companies to ensure compliance with such an approach. In addition to the unlimited company liability, the same offences would also apply to officers of a company. Now, my lords, to be absolutely clear, we appreciate and we understand that this approach is indeed appropriate and right in the case of serious criminal activity and certain regulated sectors of the economy. That is not in doubt. However, we remain to be convinced that it is appropriate here. Should an offence be committed by a company, not only would that company be liable and fined, potentially so would the officers of the company. This is not the correct time to evaluate in detail how and if those officers would realistically be liable in an industry that is already regulated by either the Health and Safety Executive under the GB Biocidal Products Regulation, or Trading Standard Services, or the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. For good order, no crime should be acceptable. But notwithstanding what I have referred to on the point of serious criminal activity and heavily regulated sectors, it should merit further discussion as to whether it is in the public interest to prosecute both a business and an individual for the same offence in this situation. Secondly, and continuing on the theme of overreach in regulation, the noble Baroness Lady Bennet's bill is seeking to establish yet another regulatory board. If I could please quote the Prime Minister, and I quote, "We will rip up the bureaucracy that blocks investment. We will march through the institutions and make sure that every regulator in this country, especially our economic and competition regulators, take growth as seriously as this room does." This was also referenced by the noble Baroness Lady Annalee of St John's, the noble Lord Thomas of Cumgeath, and the noble Baroness Lady Sugg. If I could also please refer to Thomas Brown, one of our excellent authors from the House of Lords Library, who refers in his research briefing on this bill too. the Independent Scientific Advisory Group on Chemical Safety, the Health and Safety Executive under the GB Biocidal Products Regulation, the Trading Standards Services, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the General Product Safety Regulations 2005, the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008, DEFRA, the Environment Agency, and the UK Health Security Agency Joint Research Programme on Antimicrobial Resistance. My Lords, with all due respect to the noble Baroness Lady Bennet, and with what I have just highlighted as a backdrop, perhaps we should ask ourselves, do we not already have a deep portfolio of both regulators and regulations in this space without the need to create yet another regulatory body? To conclude, my Lords, whilst we accept and respect the strength of the noble Baroness Lady Bennet's views and sentiment towards the use of biocides in consumer products, for the reasons I have set out, I'm afraid we will not be supporting this bill.
My Lords, before I was asked to respond to this private member's debate for the government, I have absolutely no clue about biocides. And I must admit, I have been a sucker for the 99.9% claims on every packaging and products in my flat in London. And now, after hearing the noble Baroness Lady Freeman about the range of biocides that are banned in some of these products, I think I'm going to go back this afternoon and look at every single product and see whether I should be keeping them in the flat. My Lords, I thank noble Baroness Bennet for the discussion the bill has generated, and I really thank all noble lords who have spoken and contributed in this debate. And I thank her for the briefing and articles and various reports that she kindly sent to me. And I must admit, I did read Professor or Dr. Fadi's briefing note last night. Now, the government recognises the intent of this bill and the importance of ensuring consumer products, including those containing biocides, remain safe. While the government has reservation about the bill, this should not be taken as dismissal of the concerns raised or the intent of the bill. Rather, government believes the cosmetics regulation and biocidal products regulation, and in addition to so many other regulations, provide long-standing regulatory frameworks that ensure products containing biocides are safe. We believe that the bill will create duplication in an area that is already well regulated and understood by industry, as mentioned by the noble Lord Earl Effingham and also Baroness Ennerley. My Lords, if products have a primary biocidal function, they will fall under the Biocidal Products Regulation. These products must meet consumer safety and environmental product protection requirements before being placed on the market in Great Britain. There is a very strict two-stage process that a biocidal product will go through. The active substance must be approved, and that costs a lot of money, and the biocidal product in which the substance is used must be authorized. As mentioned earlier by Baroness Ennerley, Baroness Suck, and many other noble lords, there are existing legislations on biocides. The Great Britain Biocidal Products Regulations broadly defines biocides as substances intended to control harmful organisms. The legislation covers something like 22 product types in 4 main groups, including preservatives, disinfectants, and pest control products. This definition is well understood and has been used by regulators, stakeholders, and manufacturers for some time. This bill introduced a separate and conflicting definition of a biocide, which applies only to substances with antimicrobial effects. As this cuts across the established definition, undermining rather than strengthening the existing robust evidence-based regulatory regime. Now, furthermore, the Cosmetic, Toiletry and Perfumery Association, who represents something like 85% of the industry in the UK in this particular area, do not support the bill, precisely because the UK cosmetics regulation is already robust, evidence-led and fit for purpose. The provisions in this bill will result in additional complexity for industry seeking to comply with regulations, as well as potential difficulties in enforcement without any additional safety benefits. And the Noble Lord Effingham is absolutely right. We do not want to impose additional regulation on SMEs, who are really the drivers, the engine drivers of growth in the country. My Lords, biocides may also be found within cosmetics, usually as preservatives. The cosmetics regulation will apply to products with a primary cosmetic purpose, as opposed to the biocidal products regulation. The cosmetics regulation outlines a robust set of safety requirements for cosmetics. Annex 5 of the regulation lists which preservatives, including biocides, may be used in cosmetics, subject to any specific conditions. Now, I refer to the noble and learned Lord Thomas, that we must keep pace with technology developments and evidence. And this is precisely why the Secretary of State has the powers to amend the cosmetic regulation to restrict or prohibit the use of substance in cosmetics subject to conditions, for example, where there is sufficient evidence, scientific evidence indicating a potential risk to human health. And Baroness Freeman's point about the HSC's spreadsheet of those biocides that are prevented, this I will take back to the Department for clarification, and also why are they not enforced. Now, the OPSS, which is the Office for Product Safety and Standards, and ministers use expert evidence advice from the Scientific Advisory Group on Chemical Safety in Consumer Products to inform policy decisions and amendments to the cosmetic regulation, as indicated by Baroness Annaley, Baroness Finlay, Baroness Suck. We do not want any more new scientific advisory board. However, having said that, government will listen to any scientific evidence and act appropriately. Government considers that the Biocidal Consumer Products Advisory Board, as proposed in the bill, would duplicate the purpose and work of the well-established EAGSC. We consider such a board to be unnecessary and think it could, in fact, create significant confusion. Other regulations, such as the registration, evaluation and authorization of chemicals, or REACH for short, also apply to the use of chemicals to ensure human health and the environment are protected. And I will take back to the department in response to the noble Baroness Lady Brinton's question about the database and whether we have kept it up to date. Now, the bill proposes that marketing, including implicit claims relating to the efficacy of a consumer product containing biocidal ingredients, can only be made if proven to the satisfaction of the Biocidal Consumer Products Advisory Board. Now, government agrees that manufacturers should not be able to make misleading claims. Accordingly, both the Cosmetics Regulation and Biocidal Products Regulation, in addition to also the Advertising Standards Authority, contains provision that prohibits products making misleading claims regarding functions or safety. In addition, as mentioned earlier by Baroness Bennett, to the existing regulatory framework, the Product Regulation and Metrology Bill, which I took and introduced to the House on the 4th of September 2024, will ensure the UK is better placed to address safety issues. The powers in the Product Regulation and Metrology Bill will allow the government to make regulations to reduce or mitigate the potential risks presented by products. This may include further regulating the use of chemicals in consumer products. As noble Lords know, the bill completed the Lords Committee stage in December, and hopefully, with fingers crossed, it will come back to report stage probably sometime in February. Now, antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, which I will refer to as it is now, which this bill aims to address, is a complex issue that requires action across all sectors, and the UK is fully committed to tackling the threat of AMR. The 2024 to 2029 National Action Plan, which the previous government launched and is very welcome, is the second. The 2024 and 29 National Action Plan is the second 5-year plan within the UK's 20-year vision, which was launched by the previous government to control, contain and mitigate AMR by 2040. Now, tackling AMR resistance requires a holistic approach across government, not only targeting biocides in one area. The government's approach is evidence-led. The National Action Plan provides a unified strategic approach. It was informed by consultation with a wide range of stakeholders to identify and prioritise actions needed to tackle AMR. It also supports coordinated action between England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales across sectors necessary to tackle AMR. In summary, my Lords, I thank the noble Baroness Lady Bennet again for the debate. I respect the intent behind the bill. Antimicrobial resistance is a complex and serious issue requiring work across all sectors. I also agree that we need to be able to address potential risks that biocides may pose in cosmetics and personal care products. However, we already have robust regulatory frameworks in place for these products that seek to ensure consumer safety and are well understood by the industry. Consequently, this bill may cloud and confuse the existing regime that is very well established, a concern also voiced by the industry, as I mentioned earlier. Government, therefore, does not support this bill in its current form. However, my Lords, officials will be happy to meet with the Baroness to discuss the safety of these products and any scientific evidence that may warrant consideration of changes to the current requirements within the current legislative framework. And in addition to the noble Baroness Lady Brinton, I will also ensure that officials will organise roundtables with manufacturers. So, my Lords, in conclusion, I would encourage the noble Baroness Lady Bennet to support the government's product regulation and metrology bill, which will provide powers needed to ensure we are better placed to address modern-day safety issues to protect consumers.
My Lords, I thank the noble Lord the Minister and all of the noble Lords who have taken part in this extremely rich, I think, debate, both those who brought their scientific expertise into the chamber and those who concentrated hard while they listened to that scientific expertise. I doubt your Lordship's House has seen a debate with more concentration of scientific evidence, but I would posit that we need many more debates that do contain this level of science in the future. I'm aware of all the people waiting for the next debate, but I think there's a couple of points that are really worth drawing out. And the key question that has arisen is there enough regulation now? And I think it's really useful to triangulate here three of the contributions from noble Lords. Now, the noble Baroness Annalay, with also Baroness Sugg and the Earl of Effingham, all raised concern about more regulation. And I think the noble Lord, I'm very, very glad that the noble Lord Thomas, noble and learned Lord Thomas of Convede was here, because I think what that contribution indicated was that actually this potentially marks a shift from the government drawing up lots of detailed rules which will always be behind, to putting responsibilities on manufacturers to say, don't mess things up, which surely should be where the responsibility lies, and takes away a lot of the complexities that the noble Baroness Annalay was referring to. But I would think it's very useful to triangulate into this the noble Lady Baroness Freeman's speech, because I think it demonstrated very clearly now that the regulators are not in any way keeping up with where we are. And I would look at some of the words from the noble Lord the Minister. The noble Lord suggested there might be duplication that what we have now is well regulated and understood. And I think the Noble Lady Baroness Freeman's speech demonstrates very clearly that it is not the case. And we don't have regulations that are fit for purpose. And that also reflects on the Noble Earl Effingham's speech. So I think triangulating those speeches is very useful. Just to very briefly pick up some specific points, I would particularly thank the Noble Lady Baroness Finlay for raising the actual toxicity to human bodies concerns that are not adequately covered. I haven't gone into that because that is the area that's supposed to be already regulated, although it clearly isn't, as the Noble Lady indicated. The Noble Lord Viscount Stansgate will be pleased to know that I will be hosting 2 events in the next 2 months on bacteriophages with academics from the University of Exeter seeking to increase and bacteriophages as an alternative to antibiotic use are certainly part of the story of how we're going to tackle the problem of AMR, but they're unlikely to be a total solution, is what I would posit. I want to pick up the Noble Lady Baroness Sugg, Brinton and others particularly raised the issue of period products, and the Noble Lady Baroness Sugg pointed out the detail of how silver damages the lactobacillus, the healthy bacteria, and that's something that I do plan, and I hope the Noble Lords here today will join me in the Product Regulation Bill, because as the Noble Lady Baroness Sugg said, people cannot know what they're buying now, and that cannot be right, and that is something we should be able to tackle right now through the Product Regulation and Metrology Bill. I do just want to pick up the points from the Noble Earl of Effingham about whether the level 5 unlimited fine is indeed the right level for this. I think the Noble Lord, Lord Brown said that once we let the AMR genie out of the bottle, we cannot put it back. If a manufacturer is responsible for letting loose a resistance gene that essentially lets forth an AMR pandemic, then I would posit that a level 5 unlimited fine, which of course the court will consider with relevance to the size of the company concerned, for a giant multinational company, that is the appropriate level. So I'm aware of time, so I'm going to finish with just some final thoughts. I really welcome the fact that the Noble Lord, Lord Leong, said that he was not dismissing the concerns that I brought forward today. I very much welcome the offers of further interaction following up on the Noble Lady Baroness Brinton's suggestion of a round table, and I look forward to further discussion in the Product Regulation and Metrology Bill. And finally, I'm really glad that the Noble Lord the Minister is going to go home and check his cupboards. And I would perhaps suggest that that provides evidence that future action is needed.